Clapton was, is, and I suppose always will be my hero. For all intents and purposes, he is the reason that I began playing guitar at all when I was a little kid. And shortly thereafter, as soon as I started playing guitar, all of a sudden then I had a whole bunch more heroes. And they just began piling in, hero after hero. And then it wasn't very long until I heard Chet, and that changed everything. But the Clapton thing never really went away, and in fact, it only became stronger, and my adoration and the debt that I feel that I owe him for the way that I think of and approach the guitar, certainly the electric guitar, it only became stronger as I grew older. And Clapton certainly got me moving forward into then Stevie Ray, which led me into Albert King, and for that I am deeply indebted. And along with Albert, then BB and Freddie, and by the time I got into fingerstyle and acoustic guitar playing, really I was already deeply moved by this music, and so I began really playing fingerstyle guitar, more so focusing on pre-war folk blues, country blues, than even diving into the deep end of the pool with Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed and Merle Travis. So the blues has really been at the center of everything I have ever done or even attempted to do with the guitar. And I thought that it merited just a few words here and a little bit of instruction. We'll be talking about sort of my approach to playing blues guitar, at least, in the abridged version here, because there's so much to say about it. So without further ado, that was a little bit of Have You Ever Loved a Woman off of Derek and the Dominoes, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, one of the greatest of the great guitar records, and not to mention just rock and roll records and blues rock records of the 20th century. And of course Duane Allman was on the record with Eric. And so anyhow, now we'll be talking a bit more about some of the tools and the tricks and the ways to get some of that going on. Now, I can sit here and show you how to do that note for note because I was obsessed enough to sit down and just work at it and slave at it for hours on end, days on end, weeks on end, months on end, years on end. However, I only did that because, as I said, Clapton is the reason I play guitar, and he was my hero. And in general, when you're approaching blues and blues rock guitar and sort of any kind of lead guitar playing that's improvised, the main thing is you really are much better off taking a few ideas from a few different players and synthesizing them into making up your own solos on the spot. And it's like on the liner notes of the John Mayall Blues Breakers featuring Eric Clapton record, on the back of that record, where whoever wrote those liner notes said, playing the blues is such complex business, and it's affected by both personal and external factors that you never really know how great you're going to play until the end of the first number of the evening is over. And that's very much so the case. So to sit there and to work things out note for note, with full disclosure that I have done that is only a means to an end. It's very different from the Chet bag and the fingerstyle guitar bag in general, where you're playing proper songs and there's a melody that you want to honor and a very definite set of chord changes and a form to the tune. Of course, there's form to all tunes, including all the blues, but the forms tend to be much more simple in the blues. They tend to be usually 12-bar forms, there are examples of 8-bar blues and 16-bar blues. However, having said all of that, what I want to do here is I'll show you some of the specifics of what Clapton's doing in his intro of that tune, but also I want to paint some more broad concepts for you and give you some broad things you could work on in order to just, make it your own, and give you some suggestions for how to keep developing this as you're working independently on your own. So we'll get going with that. Now, the first thing is there's only one Eric Clapton. We know that's true of all great guitar players, but it's really true with Eric. He is so often emulated and never really equaled. I mean, possibly, Eric Johnson has it down to a fine art. He does. So much of his sound, particularly on the Alien Love Child record, really he dialed in that woman tone, and he sounds like Clapton in the mid 60s. Of course, then Eric was, Clapton was getting a remarkably different sound once he switched to the Stratocaster, and he was playing, the Sunburst Strat on Layla and other sort of love songs. I could tell you the year here, but I choose not to. But yeah, Brownie was a great sounding guitar, Clapton's Strat on the back of Layla, and then, shortly thereafter, Blackie came into the picture, and, anyhow, without talking about Eric's guitars, you're starting out of this stock blues shape, and we're in C, so we're based around the 8th fret, and you just want to bend, that third string up a full step, and then you're just going across the second and the first string, just like a standard, almost it could be kind of a Chuck Berry lick, but then you're, bending up a whole step, so this is definitely not a Chuck Berry lick when all is said and done. Alright, I missed a little note there. But, how much vibrato you want to put at the top of that? That's, again, it's one of the great things about Clapton, and I recommend just sit down and listen to the record. And don't just listen to Clapton, listen to every guitar player you can, and really zero in on vibrato. I find myself so often, even like, contemporary guys and local guys, whenever I hear anyone play guitar, not even necessarily limited to my favorite guitar players whose records I learned from. Just whenever I hear any guitar player play, I notice that my ear is immediately drawn to their vibrato and listening for how are they approaching it, and do I like that vibrato or do I not? And through listening to things really closely like that, you begin to form an amalgam of what you like and what you want to shoot for. And so everybody's vibrato is going to be a little bit different. Everybody's voice is different. And hopefully, if you're playing the guitar, as I've said over and over again, hopefully the guitar becomes your voice. But with all of that in mind, you can emulate other vibratos and see how close you can get it. It's a good thing to shoot for, but really try to synthesize all of them, and you'll wind up with one that's you. Now in this case, I gave that a much wider vibrato than Clapton does on the record. I mean, Eric's vibrato is not that wide on this, certainly. But I missed the note there, but the concept will translate here. This is the next thing, as he does that descending lick. There's a lot of times in Clapton's playing, and this happens over and over and over again, where he's mostly out of a pretty standard shape on the neck, out of a standard kind of stock pentatonic shape, but there's a lot of motion either, across the strings, like raking the pick downwards, which we'll get to in a little bit, or really, pulling off, hammering on, and moving across the strings, so he's not so localized that they're just, one or two strings side by side. There's not a lot of, not a lot of things where it's just like limited. He's definitely exploring the whole guitar, and even if the left hand is fairly localized. So, you're starting that lick, and I'm sliding down, and then you can going up to the next thing. And this is so weird to show without a band, because this is the other thing, which I have a few misgivings about, should we really be doing this? Should I be showing you this note for note at all? And if not, why did I learn it note for note? Well, the thing is, music does not exist in a vacuum. And so much of learning to play the guitar is like learning to talk when you're a young toddler. It only happens by being exposed to others and listening to others. And you learn to play the guitar by your inspirations. That's the way it always works. You take one thing from this guy and another thing from that guy, and slowly start putting pieces together, and it becomes you. And that's so true, I mean, across the board in any kind of guitar playing. But when you're talking about improvised music, and by and large taking solos and playing lead guitar, I hope that there's some improvisation going on. That's certainly where the excitement is. It's not about just, I learned this note for note, so now I'm going to play it for you, note for note. That gets pretty boring pretty fast. Or if it is, something that you're playing note for note, it better be founded on a definite melody that is an absolute part of the composition that, like George Harrison. George being maybe my favorite of all time, like the greatest sort of came up with the greatest parts, as far as a guitar player that thinks more out of compositionally more so than improvisationally. But really, I mean, all improvisation is a spontaneous composition too. So it's all interconnected. But having said that, as I'm showing you this, more or less note for note, take it all with a grain of salt, listen to the guy, much more so than listening to me, because I might be showing you a few things that are slightly off, but you can never fail if you listen to the source that it came from. And when you're bending strings up, it's the blues. You don't want things to be super clean and super rehearsed. And on the record, there's a lot of tension. Of course, this is true with Stevie Ray Vaughan. This is true with Albert King. This is true when you listen to BB. Eric, I hear more Freddie King in Eric's playing than anyone else. Freddie is the most obvious influence to my ears on Clapton's playing to this day. But you will notice that there's some dirt on the record, and instead of just going up, articulating the string very cleanly, there's a little bit of you're slamming into the string beside it. So that was more like a Stevie thing, but that lick, if you try to think about it, you'll mess it up, just like I did right there. And that's what I keep coming back to. You can break down Chet things, you can, learn classical things, you can break down real guitar compositions, Tommy things. You can learn all of that note for note, and great. I'm glad you did that. Playing the blues, if you approach it that scientifically all the time, I think you're missing the point. But anyhow, that goes back to the liner notes of that record. You only know how well you're going to play after the first number of the evening is over. And there are so many external factors and so many personal factors. So, but that's the lick. So, it's just moving from the 13th fret in that sort of shape. And again, there's a lot of hammering on. And transferring, between, you could think of this as another variation on the pentatonic shape. I think I was getting a little bit of stratitis there. It's a long story about this guitar. That note sounded a little bit out of tune to me right now. You could think of that as one box shape of the pentatonic. And then, the stock one at the 8th fret. That's the thing about playing blues. You're connecting these pentatonic shapes, and that would be a much longer video than we have time for right now. But you are transferring from this box at the 11th fret to this box at the 8th fret. And there's a lot of hammering. So you're bending up, pulling off. That's almost like a B.B. King lick right there. You know, Clapton wanted to be B.B. King as badly as anyone else. Live at the Regal must be the greatest blues guitar record of all time. So, and be sure to get the hammer on there at the 8th and 9th fret. So, and when he goes for that B flat at the 8th fret of the 4th string, you'll hear with the band on the record, he's phrasing it just a little bit behind the beat. And again, that was, you know, some of the misgivings of showing you this note for note. You know, really so much of playing the blues, in addition to everything else I've mentioned, is it's also very communal music, and it's how you play with and off of other musicians. You know, I mean, for all we may say, you know, as serious guitar players about Keith Richards, which, by the way, I mean, Keith is one of my great inspirations. I think he's the man who put the rhythm in rhythm guitar, and the greatest of all the great rock rhythm guitar players. But, you know, Keith's not a soloist, really, of any great note. And you know, even that's a great example. You listen to the way that Keith plays off of Charlie in the Stones, and it's the same concept, you know. And so this is the thing. When you get into blues and rock forms, you know, we can isolate it and talk about it in a solo fashion, you know, just playing these licks. But more than anything else, go out and play with other people. You know, go get in bands. Go, you know, have fun and you know, sit in at jam sessions. So that's when things start really making sense and connecting the dots. So that's that lick, and then he's just out of a major C shape here. And that's, again, B.B. did that. You know, yeah, B.B. did that plenty. Actually, my brain was immediately going to Bloomfield, Carmelita Skiffle on live at Bill Graham's Fillmore West, which, if you can find that record, get that record. But anyhow, again, a lot of blues guitar players have done that. So, yeah, all right, made a mistake. So Clapton is mixing the major and the minor pentatonics a lot here. You know, I'll assume that the major pentatonics are familiar here, but if you got any questions about that, please email me, send a comment. You know, I can embellish on the difference. But so he's outlining the chords as the chord changed. The chord, you know, we were over the C7. Yeah. And then the chord changed to F7 or F9. And he's shaking that string a little bit. And my vibrato is very much so more like BB's. Mine is all from the wrist. You know, I mentioned in the vibrato video a bit about how Clapton approaches his, and it's not a way that it just doesn't work for me. But there is a slide up to the 17th fret, or possibly a bend, but the pitch does change. Again, you know, that's like a B.B. King lick. So, what? See, this is good video evidence of why you shouldn't really break down the blues and rehearse it. But you are going up to the... There's a reverse bend. So that's just, you know, outlining the F chord. And then it leads into... So, with that, we'll focus a little more on the right-hand details, and, you know, this is something you hear a lot, you know, all throughout Clapton's guitar style. So what's going on there is a lot of bending and raking across the treble string. So, and it's a feel thing and a groove thing. And again, I recommend just listen to Clapton. If you have any software that will slow the recordings down, slow it down and listen in as much depth and detail as your ears will let you. When you speed it up and you're playing at a tempo, you're just going with what feels right against the drummer and the bass player. But you're bending up. You're not bending up immediately, but you're going out of the, starting on the 4th string. So you're grabbing the half step. So you're pushing up by, roughly a half step. With bending. As I mentioned before in the bending video, there's so much emotion in the microtones. But you're pushing the string up in between that 10th fret and then the 8th fret on the next adjacent string. And once you are there, you're doing this, where with the pick, with the right hand, it's all downstrokes, raking across the 2nd and the 1st string, and you're hammering on with your pinky to the 11th fret, and then pulling off again. So your right hand doesn't have to do that much work, but and then bending up. So we'll see about that. Yeah, he doubles it. When I slowed it down, I just showed it to you as though he only did that once. But in that phrase, he doubles it. So that's the lick. And then, and again, I think about this every time I bend a string. Clapton's pitch, I have never heard better pitch from any of the blues rock guitar players bending strings. It's perfect. And so anytime you're bending a string, really just try to think about it like a singer and try to make it as expressive, and even the rate at which you bend the string. Do you hit the string and then bend it immediately all the way up to its destination like that? I mean, there is a good time and a place for that, absolutely. Or do you take a little longer to get there? And it's all so pivotal and so important, and there's so much to learn from all of those guys. I don't just mean Clapton and Stevie Ray. I mean, like, their heroes and my heroes. Listen to B.B., Freddie, Albert, Hubert Sumlin, Lightning Hopkins, all of them. And I've got more heroes than I have time to mention here. But, so that's just bending up again. So full step, and that's more like a quarter, like a. It's not quite a half step. That would be the half step, but you're not doing that. You're just going up by about the quarter step. Very kind of standard blues lick. And then comes the really cool lick where he's doing all these beautiful. It's a combination of raking and this incredible, impeccable sense of groove and time, combined with this great sense of pitch and the microtones of to which he is bending in between. So it's like let's see. Actually, I'm forgetting that now as it's so slowed down. That's it. So you're, and as you can hear, I'm articulating the string even sometimes after it's already bent. So I'm striking the string And then instead of bending up and having the note already bent, which is a usable sound, but that's not the sound that happens here, and that's not the way Clapton's doing it. You're bending it just a little bit, and then finishing getting the bent note to its destination. And using your pinky to get the 11th fret. So that's really weird to slow down. So I didn't slow it down that much for you right there. And you know, if I were to try to, I would just explain it like this. I would say you're going and then bending up again. Yes, that repeats again. It does the same idea, you know, like back to back. Except for there, the second time, when he circles around, is going through the 8th fret on the 2nd string. So you're getting all these like this. The pitch is just climbing. And Clapton does that all the time, you know, that beautiful, you know, the trills. Hendrix's trills were remarkable, of course, you know, like on the beginning of the blues version of Voodoo Child. But I digress, as is easy for me to do with the guitar. And you want to get those pull-offs there. There's the pull-off. Everything else is pretty articulated, which is part of the sound of the right hand attacking all of that. I missed the note. And that wasn't exact. Again, case in point. You know, I'm a little self-conscious about putting this on the internet, but I'm happy to illustrate that when you start thinking about blues and you start trying to rehearse blues, this is a really good example. You screw it up. So and then I know the volume is changing so much because I'm trying to keep the volume of my voice speaking into this microphone not really quiet compared with the amplifier, which all other times would be, you know, my guitar would be all the way up and I'm going into this 56 Tremolux amplifier, you know, got the thing turned up to about 11. You know, for real, my amplifiers go to 12, you know, but they sound best at 11. So, anyhow. All right, and you want to be careful with the right hand and not dampen the string like I did there. But coming off of that lick, so you're doing the trill, and what's cool about that is you're approaching it from the whole step below the root of the chord. You know, this would be over the F chord. So the notes are E flat to F. You know, how much of this did Clapton really think about or know? Who cares? You know, probably none of it, but I'm sure he felt all of it. And from the trill, you want to slide into the 10th fret. Then you're into your pentatonic, and you're just sliding back again. You could have like a pentatonic shape here. One there, and pretty much this whole intro is like between, you know, those frets and that part of the guitar. And so again, it's just connecting shapes. And sliding off, so you're sliding down, pulling off. to put that into time. And he'll do that a lot where he'll hammer into a note and then strike the, maybe like the third below. I mean the interval of third. A couple times, even 3 times. So, every time I hear that record, I notice that very last bend where he goes from the 11th, bending it up a full step. His pitch on that bend is so perfect. So, anyhow, and then he's into his vocal. That's his lead into his vocal, and he starts singing. So, anyhow, that's a bit about what's going on specifically, and I'll just cover the last part there for you. I think I made that one part up. I don't think he goes down to the bass there. I think I'm confusing that probably with someone I stole from Hendrix. Anyhow, those are some of the specifics about what Clapton's doing on the intro and the tune itself. As I've said, take it all with a grain of salt. Use some of these ideas and make something of your own up with it. I even recommend, in addition to playing along with the records, if it's hard to find other people to play with, this is even more important. Do play along with the records and, definitely steal as much as you want to specifically, like I know, all those guys, listening to Muddy Waters records and listening to Buddy Guy records, listening to B.B. King records. And that's the reason to copy, is that to have a clear internalization of what you want your hands to do and the sounds you want to come out of the guitar. But it's sort of like learn all your scales and forget them. That's sort of what it's like. It's like learn all that stuff, try to get it as close as you can, and then throw it out the window, because the point is not to go out and to play a note-for-note rendition of exactly what Eric Clapton played. It's so counterproductive to the whole spirit of that music. I mean, let alone like the originals, it's like it would bore me to tears. It might be incredibly impressive, but it would bore me to tears to hear somebody playing a note-for-note Buddy Guy solo, or even as brilliant as BB was live at the Regal or on Cook County Jail, being, I think, maybe the 2 great live BB King records. That would just be so... I hate to put a judgment on and say it would be so stupid, but it kind of would be so stupid to hear somebody go out and, I'm going to recreate all of BB King's solos note for note. That's not what this music is about. So, take what you can, get as specific as you need to get the essence and the spirit of it, and then just start making stuff up and going out and playing with people. Do play along with the records if you don't have other people to go out and play with. And when I was young and I was starting to learn how to improvise, backing tracks, and now they're very accessible. They're so easy to find. Even just dial up on YouTube or anywhere, backing track blues in C. You'll find a million of them. You can find one that you like playing along with better than some others. Some of them are kind of cheesy, some of them are pretty good. So backing tracks are good because then you can just practice soloing and start to make your own licks up. So I hope this has helped. And if you got any questions, by all means, email me. Please leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel. And tune in next time. We'll continue talking about all these things. So hope this finds you well. I'll see you the next time.